Hello, everyone. Good Wednesday evening. I'm Scotty Powell, forecaster with Burke Weather, and you're watching another Carolina's Weather Group. And tonight, I'm talking about precipitation types, something that we've really not covered here on the show. And it's so basic. You probably learned it back in elementary school, but we're going to kind of hit the high notes and the low notes of all the different precip types and what happens in what season, and go from there. I'm sure eventually we'll talk about the cold Arctic air set to invade the area, and maybe even an active storm pattern next week. So a lot on the table tonight, and we'll discuss everything. As always, we have a question and answer session that Joey will be monitoring, and he also monitors Twitter and Facebook. So if you have any questions for our guest, make sure you shoot them that way, and Joey will get those, and we'll get them answered. As well, we're also going to be podcasting, so this is the February 11th edition if you are going to be watching a replay or listening to it at a later date. So, again, we have two great guests. I don't know how to introduce him, but I'll just introduce him some way. Emmy Award-winning Chief Meteorologist Grant Gilmore from WFMY in Greensboro, North Carolina. And also first-time guest Brent Watts, who is the Chief Meteorologist at WDBJ in Roanoke, Virginia. So, guys, welcome to the show, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks a lot, Scotty. Brent, since you've never been on the show before, man, why don't you go ahead, and I'll let you kind of lead the way.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Brent Watts. I'm a meteorologist at WDBJ-7, TV station, CBS affiliate in Roanoke, Virginia. And I grew up in this area, grew up in Botetourt County, which is just a county north of Roanoke, and basically got my interest in weather. We had, I don't know if I'm getting some feedback here. I don't want to take my earpiece out, but basically I grew up in this area, had a big interest in weather. Grew up in a town called Buchanan. We were hit by the flood of '85 back in 1985, and it was really impressive for me. I was only in third grade, and I remember just going downtown and seeing the entire town just underwater. And after that was Hurricane Hugo, which was a big impact for me. I remember getting hit by winds from that, and we had some flooding too. So that was one of my biggest influences. Those two were getting me interested in weather. So I've been working at the TV station now, WDBJ, for about 16 years. I went back to school for my meteorology, and I've been doing weather now for about 12 years.
Wow, the flood of '85, that's the first that we've had a guest mention, so that's awesome.
Yeah.
Good information. Yeah. And Grant, my friend, how have you been lately? It's been a busy month or two for you.
It has, I mean, it's crazy, like a busy month, but, not busy all at the same time. Everybody in the Triad is just itching for snow. It is unbelievable. I mean, it's like we haven't had snow in decades here in the Triad. So, just trying to let people know that there's not a chance of snow has been exhausting. Until the last day or so, kind of we've changed our tune a little bit. I'm sure we'll talk more about that later. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Emmy. That was really cool. We were fortunate to have 9 Emmy nominations here at WFMY coming out of last year, and actually the Emmy that I won was for the Valentine's Day snowstorm that we're coming up on a year anniversary tomorrow. So that's kind of a cool coincidence that we're seeing coming up tomorrow, where parts of the Triad, actually parts of our viewing area, I should say, got up to 20 inches of snow. And now was over the foothills here in the Triad, we picked up roughly around 9 inches of snow. But that was kind of the first of 2 really bad snowstorms that we had last year. So it's been a whirlwind of a 2015 so far, but compared to last year, definitely not as busy, and hopefully that stays that way. I mean, as much as I love winter weather, it always makes our workload a little bit more. And of course, winter forecasting, which we'll talk a lot of tonight, is probably, I would say, the hardest thing to forecast for, at least here in the Piedmont. I mean, other places it may not be the case.
Yeah, that's right. Brent and I were talking a little bit before we started the show, and just how the models have wavered from one extreme to the other. It's been crazy to kind of pinpoint something. I kind of go off topic a little bit, and I just saw your tweet maybe about 20, 30 minutes ago, kind of reminisce a little bit about last year's storm, and I totally forgot that was this time last year. What was it like up there in the Triad?
So, I mean, it was actually interesting. We had a storm that just grazed our viewing area today, February 11th, of last year, and that storm actually brought close to 6 inches of snow, maybe a little bit more, down east closer to the Wilmington area. And that was something that I remember we were watching, and that was the immediate concern for us. And that kind of grazed through, brought a trace of snow to our southern viewing area down towards Montgomery County. But then we had this other just huge storm system come up, and it was, your classic cold air damming scenario, but the cold air just took over, and so the moisture built in, and we just got, hit really hard with some snow. We probably got about 3 or 4 inches of snow within the first few hours of this event, and that took us up to around 5 o'clock. It started snowing probably around 1 or 2 in the afternoon. And then after that, we started to see that classic transition over to a sleet and freezing rain. And we were expecting to get a whole lot more snow on the back edge of the system, but it was actually shifted more to the foothills, and that's where those guys picked up close to about 20 inches of snow in some places. But it was the biggest snowstorm that we'd had here in the Triad in about 10 years, so that was a really big deal. But the thing that was kind of fun for us is we covered the whole thing from start to finish from our weather garden, which, Scotty, you've been in before, and we did every minute from that weather garden. We were out there in the snow, not just forecasting, but we were telling the snow the story, and it was kind of fun at the end of the day because it really led into Valentine's Day, which who doesn't love snow on Valentine's Day, right?
Hey, by the way, we're very jealous of your weather garden down there, Grant. This is very slick.
Well, I'll tell you what, when it gets down to 9 degrees, you're welcome to come down and hang out in it.
I don't know, maybe not. Okay.
The weather garden is really nice there. Brent, did you guys? Forgive me for not knowing this, but did you guys get affected by that storm last year?
Yeah, we did. We did. It started on that the Wednesday, continued into Thursday. We ended up getting 19 inches of snow in Roanoke. It was our third largest snow on record. The top one is still the blizzard of 1996, so that's still the top one. But it was the third largest snow that we had. But it pretty much knocked the whole region out for a couple days. I remember, luckily, our TV station's located near hotels, and I remember that a lot of the crew and at the end of their shift just had to walk up the hill to the hotels and kind of get a room there. But that was probably one of the biggest ones we've had too, as Grant mentioned, probably a decade at least.
Yeah, I remember here in the Western Carolinas, we picked up a little under a foot, just like Grant was talking about, and it seemed like last February was just one of those years that we got a lot of, or one of those months that we got a lot of snow. So speaking of that, we're going to kind of transition into our topic tonight, and that's precipitation types. And I guess while we've been talking about it, guys, how do we get snow? What is the process of that, and why is it so hard to forecast here in the area? Grant, I'll let you start.
Well, I'll say, right off the bat, just the process of snow forming is an incredibly delicate process. And when you think about it, when just the basic level of what a snowflake is, I mean, it is a collection or just a single ice crystal. And they are incredibly small, incredibly delicate, and the conditions have to be just perfect for snow to form. You have to have the right pressure, you have to have the right moisture, and you obviously have to have the right temperature. And a lot of the times you get temperatures that are cold enough to have snow, but you have to have the right amount of moisture. So basically what happens with a snowflake forming is you have to have one ingredient, which is you have to have moisture. But I think more importantly than that also is you have to have this thing called a condensation nucleus, which is nothing more than just a very small piece of organic matter, like a piece of dust or a piece of clay or something like that. And you have to have that moisture then will grow, if you will, on that condensation nucleus, and that's where you start to get that ice crystal formation. So basically that's what happens. You get this moisture developing crystals on this condensation nucleus, and there's different forms that it can grow. It can either grow by running into other ice crystals or just continue to grow off of whatever moisture is available in the atmosphere. So I mean that's a really basic explanation, but even that is complicated. And then that's how it forms, but then from there, does it reach the ground? And that typically becomes a huge problem for us here in the Triad. Does that snowflake melt? Does it evaporate? Does it melt and then refreeze? Or, what happens to that snowflake? And, that ultimately creates a lot of headaches and gray hairs and bald heads for meteorologists in here in the Piedmont.
Yeah, and kind of to promote Grant there, he has a great video that he produced, I want to say maybe last week, that was on his Facebook page talking about that, showing a lot of graphics and stuff, so pretty cool stuff. And when we get snow, Brent, we could get a dry snow, a wet snow. Maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about that and the ratios and stuff like that, because the old adage of a tenth of an inch of rain equals an inch of snow may hold true and it may not hold true.
Right, exactly, and that's one thing that a lot of people talk about. They think that all snow is the same, and you talk about the 10-to-1 ratio, and that basically means that on average, if you got 1 inch of rain, that may produce about 10 inches of snow, and that is if the water conditions, the amount of water in the snow is of that magnitude. But the drier and colder it is, or basically the colder it is, the more snow you're going to get out of that 1 inch of water. So you may get snow ratios, 15, 20 inches for that 1 inch of water. So it goes into, looking at what's happening in the upper levels of the atmosphere and the mid levels there. And what's really helpful is the weather balloon soundings that are sent up. And I know that we have the one in Blacksburg that's sent up 2 times a day, and we use that weather information from those weather balloons. It goes into a lot of the computer modeling programs so that we can help figure out what is going to fall from the sky. And the tough part is, and I know Grant probably has the same problem down there, is that it's not it's not like the Northeast where everybody's cold. It's one area might be a little bit colder than another area. Another area might have a little warm pocket aloft, so it changes it over to some sleet. So that's one of the toughest parts, around here. We have a lot of mountains. Is forecasting who is going to get what, and it's not as easy as everybody's going to get snow or everybody's going to get sleet. A lot of times around here, it's one of those we like to call a wintry mix, where it can be a little bit of everything.
And Brent, to kind of add on to the snow talk a little bit, it affects you more probably than anybody else on the panel is northwest flow snow events, and maybe a little bit talk about that, how that is actually a little bit of effect off the Great Lakes up in the Midwest.
We do, and when we get strong Arctic fronts that come through, kind of like the one that's coming through late tonight and tomorrow, we get very strong northwest winds that come in. So what will happen is the winds will blow over the mountains, will help to lift up those clouds, squeeze out some snow showers. A lot of times the mountains will kind of keep most of them on one side, but every once in a while the winds will be strong enough and you'll have enough moisture that those snow bands actually come over the mountains, and they're almost finger-like bands. You might drive 10 miles and see nothing, and then all of a sudden you get into this quick burst of snow that could drop a quick inch in a short amount of time, but just over a small area. So that's what we're most likely going to see tomorrow. Actually, it's kind of timely that we're talking about this, but we could have some of those bands that come in tomorrow.
And I know for the mountain communities here, I mean, those bands, like you said, they just sit there and they can produce pretty good amounts of snow. I know this year we haven't really seen a lot of northwest flows snow events that's accumulated to a lot, but in previous years, I mean, it could easily dump 6 to 8 inches of snow in no time.
Yeah. Yep, we've seen that.
Well, Brent was a little bit talking about the Piedmont area, and Grant, that's where we kind of introduced the warm nose, and that's what you were talking about. That's where we all pull our hair out, and it's so hard to forecast because where that warm pocket of air develops depends on what kind of wintry precipitation we could see.
Yeah, exactly. And where it forms and how thick it is, how warm that air is in that warm nose. And actually, I do have I prepared a presentation for you guys.
Awesome.
If I can remember how to do it, actually, hold on 1 second.
Well, hold up. This is the first on this show. Somebody prepared? Hang on.
Okay, so don't make fun of me here. But can you guys see that?
Not yet.
Not yet.
You just see my ugly mug. Okay, cool. Okay, let's share this again. Okay, so if you can see this, so kind of looking at the profile here. This is if you're to take a cross section of the atmosphere, and this gets into kind of our greater discussion, I think, as a whole, of talking about precip type here, or anywhere for that matter, for winter precipitation. But the areas there with the kind of that orangish hue, you know, that's what we talk about, like a warm nose. When you have this area of warm air moving in over colder air, and the reason it's called a warm nose is because when you look at it on a profile of the atmosphere, it actually does look like a nose, or the profile of your nose coming in over cold air. So, and that's really what is melting those snowflakes, like what I was talking about earlier. And so you get these melting snowflakes that literally just turns into rain. That's all it is. It's just liquid. And depending on how thick that warm layer is, either that rain will stay a liquid all the way down to the ground, and if there's cold enough air at the ground, then that liquid will then refreeze once it hits the ground. But like with sleet pellets, you know, that's where you get that warm nose. It melts the snowflakes into a liquid, and then if you have cold enough air just above the ground, then it will refreeze those liquid drops into little sleet pellets, and then that's when you get sleet. But you know, it's something. It goes beyond just dealing with the warm nose per se. But I mean, you're dealing with dry air too, and that's something that we. How do I take the share thing off? There we go. Maybe there we go.
Yep.
Gosh. Weather map, but I can't do this stuff. I can talk in front of a weather map, but not this. But you know, something that was really interesting. Just is this working?
Yeah, you're
Okay.
good.
I'm getting a lot of dings. Okay. So we had this scenario just a couple weeks ago where we didn't have a warm nose. It was cold all the way through, and we were but it wasn't below freezing. We had temperatures that were above freezing. It was probably about 40 degrees. And it started to rain, but then we started getting sleet, and we didn't know why. It was crazy. And we looked at the profile, and there was a huge dry slot at about 850 millibars, and that dry slot caused there to be evaporation, which then cooled the atmosphere above the surface, refreezing that rain into sleet. So while initially temperatures were above freezing, there was this dry layer that, you know, effectively caused temperatures to drop and freeze, and then we got the sleet. It was a crazy scenario, but it just goes to show that it's more than just temperatures that you have to look at. It's, you know, it's the dryness or lack thereof in the atmosphere.
Yeah, and you know what, Grant? I think that's the thing that people really don't understand. You know, the general public doesn't understand that they want the most accurate thing that they can get under the circumstances of what you're talking about. I mean, winter weather forecasting is, I mean, I think one of the toughest, especially around these parts. And you know, it's not like you can, you know, people want accurate forecasts all the time, but they want extremely accurate when there's winter weather, and you've got so many variables to come into play there. But that's a great example of one.
Well, you know, when you talk about accuracy with weather, and this is probably a whole nother, you know, night of conversation, but if you were to have a TV, you know, if you're looking at a TV that had 5 dots per inch, you know, DPIs, or, you know, pixels, you know, over a course of your television, you don't get a very good picture. Like, that football game is going to be incredibly boring that you're watching. Right. And that's the problem that us meteorologists have, is we only have a few points across our viewing area or across our forecast area that give us a good sampling or a good picture of the weather. And, you know, we do the best with what we can.
Yeah.
That's a great point, and I'd love, because I know, Brent, you get a weather balloon launch at Blacksburg, and Grant, you guys get one at Greensboro. I don't think the public necessarily knows how important those weather balloon launches are. I mean, that just really just tells us the whole story.
Yeah, I mean, I think the public doesn't even know that they exist. I mean, really, I mean, you know, I think, you know, honestly, I think kids probably do more than the adults do. I mean, a lot of times we'll go to school visits, and we're fortunate enough to have one of the you know, balloons in the radio signs too that the Weather Service uses to kind of show the kids what they do and what, you know, how that's part of weather forecasting. But I think the general public doesn't even really understand and even know that the Weather Service is doing that. But those are invaluable, really, a resource. I mean, I think above anything, that's definitely one of the things that I don't think we'd be able to do, you know, a quarter of what we do without the upper air data.
Hey, Brent, has any of your school visits, has any of those kids ever asked you if that was the weather balloon that crashed in Roswell, Mexico?
No. The question they always ask is, has one ever hit anyone? and if anyone has ever been killed by a weather balloon, and I'm like, not that I know of.
me and Scotty got the Roswell, New Mexico question earlier this year.
You did? Oh, wow. Yeah. I haven't gotten that one yet.
Yeah, we were presented to some fifth graders, and it was a great conversation and stuff. And as we wrap up, we always do the question and answer thing, and they said, "So is it true that the aliens shot down at the weather balloon at Roswell?" And I said, "The only thing I know about aliens is," and then I pointed to Joey so he could finish that question. But yeah, weather balloons are very important, and I know Ricky said that Charlotte's trying to get a system up. I know he's studying, but he may want to chime in on that.
We actually tested ours the other day. It was about a week and a half ago, and so we got the data back. We just got to figure out how to plot it quicker in real time and then get that information sent out. But it's a completely mobile weather balloon launch system, so we could take it anywhere, whether we could take it, on a research mission out in the field or wherever we needed to go.
And Ricky, forgive me if I'm wrong, but you were part of the weather balloon launch last year at NBC Charlotte. Is that correct?
Yeah. Ironically, that was about a year. Well, the story ran about a year ago. Last week, it was part of a February sweep story they did, and we launched a weather balloon with Brad Panovich and the Firstborn Storm Spotter group that went up to, I think it was 110,000 feet was its final bursting altitude. And the problem was it got caught in the jet stream, which was very thick that day, 70 knots, and that thing just blew all the way over past Fort Bragg, and we thought it was going to go down the military installation for a minute, and we're kind of worried about that. But luckily, they found it 3 weeks later in a hunting reserve, after they launched the NBC Charlotte helicopter to go out there and try to find it. Because it had GoPros on it, so they wanted those back. So that balloon was fun to launch, and we're going to try to do one for Charlotte Weatherfest as well. So.
And a lot of cool video from that GoPro too, just to see the curvature of the Earth. So I think it's on YouTube somewhere if you guys would like to see that. Talking about the worm nose, though, Grant, it really... I know it gives Brent headaches too, but for your area specifically, I mean, a change in 5 miles or 1 degree can do a lot of headache with the wintry preset types that we get.
Yeah, for sure. You talk about, just a few hundred feet within the atmosphere, and depending on how thick a warm nose is or how thick the cold layer is at the surface, and that's gonna determine what type of weather you have. And honestly, it's not just about what type of weather that you're going to see, but what type of impacts are going to be felt in the area. And that's where it really comes down to being a big problem, because I mean the formation of sleet or freezing rain is a very delicate process. And I mean, if you're expecting sleet, which as far as I'm concerned, sleet is the best type of winter weather that you can have. It doesn't really cause much of a problem on the roads. It bounces, yeah, it accumulates a little bit, but you can really just brush it off. It's not that big of a deal. But if you just get a little bit warmer temperatures in the mid levels of the atmosphere, or maybe a little bit colder temperatures right near that cold layer at the surface, then you've got a whole different situation on your hands, and you've got freezing rain. And freezing rain is just so crippling. Freezing rain's when you get that liquid that just can go anywhere. It's going to land on streets, it's going to land on trees and power lines, which is the immediate concern, and that's when you have that water refreeze or freeze, and it turns to ice and just encasing things, and you get the weight of the water or the ice on trees, and then you have power outages, and it's a horrible situation. So and that's the problem, is because it's more than just trying to figure out exactly what type of precipitation you're going to have, but ultimately what type of impact and how we need to get our communities to prepare.
Hey, Grant, funny you mentioned about sleet and how it's not dangerous. I remember we had an event one time where the temperature was just perfect that the snowflake melted, but we had a cold enough, say, a couple thousand feet. We had like 3 inches of sleet accumulate on the ground. It was real cold, and literally, when you would get out and walk on it, you couldn't crunch down into it. You were walking on top of it.
Yeah, and it's not to say that sleet isn't dangerous, because it is. It's ice. Let's not kid ourselves. But you can have a scenario where you're going to get sleet, and you can get a lot of it. But it's crazy. You rarely get a lot of sleet. It's rare, I think, that you're actually going to get accumulating sleet. That's really hard to do, to maintain that type of temperature profile to support that.
It is.
Yep. I've almost,
Grant. Oh, go ahead, Brent. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I mean, I agree with Grant. I mean, I think I may have seen more hail accumulate, deeper than I have sleet. I mean, sleet in itself, it seems to be, one of those rare things. It's usually mixed with something else.
If I can chime in on that real quick, though, because I wanted to address this because it was a big problem, Grant, at least during our snowstorm we had down here in Charlotte last year, was how does sleet really go into affecting the overall accumulation of snow? When you have the sleet mixing in, how does that cut down on the totals?
That was a big problem. Well, not a big problem, but it was a big factor, I guess, in our snowstorm for the Valentine's Day snowstorm last year. Was we had a good fluffy snow, about 4 inches of snow had accumulated within the first few hours, and then we started getting sleet, and it compacts the snow. It's a little bit heavier than a snowflake, and so it's going to compact that snow. So your snow totals, in terms of what you're measuring with a ruler, actually goes down. So it really does become difficult in measuring, your actual snow total if you get some sleet mixed in, because if you didn't measure it right before the sleet came, you don't know exactly how high that snow was, which, sleet becomes a big problem when you talk about, forecast models and snow accumulation output, because it takes into account, like you were talking about, Brett, the 10-to-1 ratio, where, it accounts sleet as the same thing as snow, and let's throw it all together and let's call it 20 inches of snow. Have fun.
Right. Yeah. No. And that's you're exactly right. And I know you guys do account for sleet mixing in too. It's like sometimes if you think there's going to be sleet mixing in, you just kind of be a little cautious and maybe take the amounts down a little more, just to be cautious. I know we have to do that here sometimes. But yeah, I mean, if you're planning for all snow and you get an 30 minutes to an hour of sleet, I mean, it in some cases can bust your forecast. I mean, if you didn't account for that.
Yeah, and that happened last year, Joey. Joey lives about, about 30 miles to the east of where I'm located. We had a good 7 to 8 inches of snow, and he was setting, around 4 inches of snow, because you had a sleet that just kept on for at least an hour or so, and it really cut down on the accumulation totals.
Yeah, the sleet started. We had like 10 minutes of sleet, and then went back to snow, and then a little bit later it switched back, and then eventually we had about an hour period where it was just pure sleet, and it killed our snow totals. But luckily, I think I forecasted a little bit lower on the scale that day, so I skirted in a little bit under the wire. I was still good.
Hey, I have a question for our guest. We've mentioned so far about temperature profiles and evaporative cooling stuff. Explain a little bit about vertical velocities and rate of precip and how that could influence precip tops.
Grant, you want to go first?
Oh gosh, where do you begin with that? Well, vertical velocities, you're looking at the upward motion in the atmosphere, and the more lift you have in the atmosphere, the more condensation you're going to have, which ultimately is going to lead to more precipitation. So, it really just throws another issue into the mix. I will say, as a rule, for me, if I see more vertical velocities in a forecast model, I'm going to lean more towards snow. I'm going to lean more towards heavier precipitation, which if you have heavier precipitation, generally you're going to be pulling that colder air down towards the surface, and you're going to create a overall cooler atmosphere for that precipitation to fall in. So that's kind of a general rule, but of course you really have to look at the entire profile. But it really creates an issue where, say you do have a warm nose and you have heavy precipitation really high up in the atmosphere, so you have heavy snow, say around 20,000 feet, and that heavy snow falls into that warm layer. Well, the heavy snow falls into the warm layer, melts the snow, and then say you're thinking, okay, well, it's going to fall back into a cold layer, we're going to get sleet, and that was the forecast. Well, if you have heavy enough precipitation, it's going to grab a hold of that warm air now, and then that's going to pull that warm air down to the surface, where you may just get a cold rain, and you end up not having any winter precipitation whatsoever, because now you have above freezing temperatures at the surface because of that warm air that was pulled down by the heavy precipitation. So it really creates a lot of possibilities.
We had an example of that last year, in fact, during our storm in February, where we had one wave of snow. It was kind of a 1-2 punch. We had one wave of snow that came through, dropped about 8 to 12 inches of snow, and then there was a second wave. There was a disturbance that kind of met up, and we had some some bands in there that set up and dropped literally about 4 or 5 inches of snow in an hour's time, but only in a small area. And there was even reports of thunder snow, so some convection in there. So it was pretty impressive. That area ended up getting about 24 to 25 inches of snow compared to everyone else's 15 to 19. So I mean, that played a huge role in that, but it's always, a lot of times it's tough to predict where exactly that's going to fall. Models sometimes have a handle on it, but again, sometimes even just a 30, 40, 50 mile shift in where that is can totally change everything.
And in our part of the country where everything seems to be borderline anyway, it just makes forecasting all that much tougher.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, me personally, trying to predict something, I've fallen for it before, thinking that vertical velocities would do the trick, and it didn't do it.
Actually, guys, I got a viewer question that just came in. One of our loyal listeners, Lynn, she wants you guys to explain what the wet bulb temperature. Explain how that affects things and basically generally how that works. I'll leave that up to either one of you.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll give you an example. I'll tell you who really has to pay attention to the wet bulb temperature is people that make snow, like snow makers, like the ski resorts. They need to have a certain wet bulb temperature, and or they can't make snow. So an example, for them is you got to be able to have dry enough air, and just enough, a combination of dry air and moisture, so that you get the temperature down to meet up and form snow crystals. I mean, the whole idea is you got to be able to form snow crystals, and for that to happen, they've got to meet up. So.
Hello.
Sorry.
So I've got a mouse that I click it once and a double click. So when I try to unmute myself, yeah. Anyway, so the wet bulb temperature, it's not that difficult of a term. Really, all it is what the temperature will become once the atmosphere, or once all of the moisture in the atmosphere is evaporated and the temperatures drop to the dew point. So how cold can the temperature actually get once it starts precipitating? And that's something that places like Boston aren't really going to be paying that close attention to what the wet bulb temperature is. But when we're borderline here, I know in the Piedmont, we'll be watching the wet bulb temperature Tuesday morning. How cold do we get? And so we could go into an event where our temperatures are, say, 38 degrees, and the dew points are maybe in the 20s. And so once it starts precipitating, the process of precipitation is going to cause there to be evaporation in the atmosphere, and the process of evaporation is a cooling process, which means that there's energy taken to evaporate the water into a gas, and that's going to effectively cool the temperature. So the wet bulb temperature is just showing you how cold can it get through that cooling process. So that's something that you have to watch. So when it starts to precipitate, you have temperatures at 38 degrees. If those temperatures are possibly able to drop down to freezing, then you have, a concern for winter precip.
Kind of a follow-up question to that, another viewer question. Does water freeze at 32 degrees? Be scientific.
Pure water freezes. I mean, is this pure water, or is this a mixture of what? No, I mean, basically,
yes and no.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I think it's a trick question.
I guess.
I mean, what you were, I think, Brett, what you were getting at talking about pure water.
Yeah.
We were talking about earlier how snow forms. You can have up in the clouds, up where Superman flies. You can have little water droplets that are colder than 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees Celsius. That exists. Super cooled water droplets is what it's called. And so, no, water does not necessarily freeze at 32 degrees. You need, something for those ice crystals to latch onto and form, and that's what we were talking about earlier with those condensation or condensation nucleus. You need something for those ice crystals to form. Otherwise, you're just going to have a bunch of cold water droplets floating around.
Yeah, and a cool example of that is some people may have done this before and never even realized it. They put a bottle of water in a freezer, and they take it out, and it still looks like it's, that it's not frozen, but you touch it or open it up, and the whole thing just instantly freezes. So, I mean, and that takes into consider a lot of other things too, but that water could technically be below 32 degrees and still not be frozen.
Guys, I have a question, and I'll be curious as your explanation on this. Snowflakes just don't occur out of nowhere. You got to have, and I believe the term's right, dendritic growth zone. Grant and Brent, explain to the viewers tonight what that is and what actually happens to create a snowflake.
I should have picked an easier show. This is just too hard.
Yeah.
Hey, there will be a quiz on this after we go off air.
I hope so. There better be a quiz.
And Scotty started this show with this is stuff you probably learned in elementary school.
Yeah, I think
dendritic growth and condensation nuclei. Yeah,
right, there you go.
I had a heck of a science teacher, guys.
Third grade science. There you go. Okay, so I mean, to answer the question as simply as possible. So, snowflakes are what are called, in the basic level, they are dendrites. So that kind of takes out that fancy term, dendritic growth zone. It's basically the zone in the atmosphere where you're going to get those ice crystals or those dendrites forming. And you have to have, kind of ideal conditions for snowflakes or dendrites to form are actually temperatures, roughly between 10 and 15 degrees below zero. So, and maybe, it varies, it's all kind of rough, weather is not an exact science, but, so you have to have temperatures at least that cold in order to start getting those ice crystals. Now, I mean, it's a complicated balance with pressure and moisture and their relationship to each other, but, just when you think about saturation, or if you think about like 100% relative humidity, you have to have, that type of environment where you do have a near saturated or saturated atmosphere to start to get that environment to where you're going to get those dendrites forming. And that's something that, you can look at with forecast models. It can put up red flags and say, okay, here is a scenario coming in. This is where the dendritic growth zone is expected to be. How does that compare to the rest of the atmosphere and how the precipitation is going to fall from there? In fact, I don't know if you guys have used BuffKit before, but they actually have a feature on there where you can see precipitation coming in, and it will flash red on your screen and say, no ice crystals in the cloud, no ice crystals, don't, consider sleet or consider some type of ice because you won't get snowflakes.
And different temperatures, one thing to point out to folks that may not be familiar with that is different temperatures produce different types and even shapes of those dendrites. So there's plates and there's like columns and plates. Some look like the typical snowflake shape, and some are kind of like hollow, they're kind of like columns. They look like they can even be hollow. So the temperature for which the snowflakes form really depend on what kind of snowflake it is and even what they look like. So
thank you guys for answering that.
Yeah.
And there's sometimes, and it seems like it'll happen here in the mountains and foothills a lot, sometimes with northwest flow events, you'll have the moisture content, but that moisture content does not get to that growth zone, and what you end up happening, even though you've got temperatures cold enough, you just end up with like rain, which is freezing.
Right.
Yeah, I just got a message from someone that said my elementary theory for this show has just got thrown out the window. So
we're sorry about that, whoever it is.
I've got another precip type we can discuss, and we got a couple more that we want to hit as we're kind of getting toward 20 minutes now left. But one that the wording is simple, but maybe not the forecasting of it is. What about freezing fog? You guys had a lot of freezing fog events. Enjoy those?
We actually had one last night. And we have these, of course, now on the apps. Everybody gets the alerts, and so one popped up. It was a special weather statement, freezing fog, and so we had like 4 or 5 people ask, "What the heck is freezing fog?" So apparently we didn't do a very good job of explaining what freezing fog was, or they weren't paying attention. But freezing fog is basically fog that forms when the temperature is below 32 degrees, and it's water droplets that are basically freezing on contact to surfaces that are below freezing. Now, what's interesting about it is normally the roads end up being okay, but it's things like trees, elevated surfaces that get these little tiny water drops on it. And what's cool is it can create, especially on some of the vegetation, some really cool icing, and we got some interesting pictures, and I don't have any with me right now, but some interesting pictures of ice that had formed from freezing fog. So we get it pretty frequently around here.
We don't get it that often. I mean, well, in the immediate Piedmont, it's more so. I mean, we'll get freezing fog up in the foothills every once in a while, but for whatever reason, anytime that we get fog, it's a little bit too warm for that scenario. I mean, it's possible. We've had it a few times, but yeah, Brett, you guys definitely see it a lot more up your way.
Yeah.
And Brett, actually, I have not really a question, just a comment. Dean Davison says that he works with you guys up at the WDBJ, and just wanted me to give you a shout out and say hello to you. So,
yeah.
Dean, thanks for watching.
yeah. Dean is a weather watcher. He's a weather watcher and gives us weather reports. So yeah. Hello, Dean. Thank you very much for your weather reports.
And speaking of precip types that are kind of weird or strange, the word grapple. What in the heck is grapple? We had a couple of people on our pages throughout the past week or so say, ask about grapple. So, Brent, we'll start with you. I know that, Grant, we just had some grapple here a couple weeks ago, but we'll start with you, Brett. What is grapple?
Well, grapple's like one of those random things. It looks like it could be soft hail or snow. It could be snow pellets, but it's basically precip that forms when the droplets they're very, like we were talking about, super cool droplets of water. They collect other pieces of water and they freeze. So it could be, sometimes you can get grapple when there's no, big snow in the forecast. It could be just a little bit of ice, just enough that's forming in the clouds that can fall down. But it's, it's one of those things where sometimes it's tough to tell the difference between the sleet and the grapple, or whether it's snow. A lot of times when people are trying to identify and send us reports, what they think might be some snow or even some sleet ends up being just some light grapple. So it's kind of like this mystery precip type.
Yeah, I think grapple is the coolest, not just word, but precipitation that you're ever going to get. If you get grapple, take a picture of it and send it to me, because I love seeing it. In fact, some of even our reporters, it's one of those things. It's like, people don't care about sleet or freezing or whatever. If they don't know the difference between the two, they don't seem to be too concerned about it. But the people who know about grapple, they'll never forget it, because once you've seen it and you've identified that is grapple, it is very cool. I mean, it's large enough to where, or it can be large enough to where you can see, the crystal structures, or part of a snowflake that's collected some of those super cooled water droplets and frozen on top of that, and it is really cool precipitation. So it's rare, but it is pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what the best way to describe it. I guess maybe like styrofoam, little tiny styrofoam pieces.
I've got you. I'm going to give you. I'm gonna give you guys a weather geek moment.
All right.
I was 12 years old. My grandmother took me to the mall. I looked into the little ice cream case at the mall, and I said, grapple. But
it does.
Dippin' Dots, grapple, it's the same thing. That was me at 12.
Yes, I can totally see that.
Yeah, we always say Dippin' Dots, or like you're talking about, those little beans and beanbag chairs that come out every once in a while. That's exactly what it looks like.
I think I was actually asking for grapple pictures, and Joey puts up a picture of Dippin' Dots on my Facebook page. So thank you for your picture submission.
that was me. That's what I always think about, because that's a true story. The first time I ever saw Dippin' Dots ice cream, and I was like, that looks like grapple. That's what. That was me. I didn't have a lot of girlfriends growing up, apparently.
Hey, here's a big question though. Have you ever seen pink and blue grapple?
Yeah.
No, but that's beside the point.
Well, the little meme that's been going around for this show for the past couple of weeks is, Squidward, you thought that was hell outside. We were talking a little bit about sleet earlier, but I know a lot of people reported a couple of weeks ago of actually hailstones falling out of the sky. And Grant, I'll leave that question to you, because you and I had a little conversation on Twitter. Hail can only occur when
you have a thunderstorm.
That's the only time.
Yeah. And it's initially I would get frustrated about this, and I've really had to do some soul searching and take a step back because honestly, I can totally understand why it's confusing. I actually was just on the phone with my sister right before this show started, and I just thought I'd ask her. She's a nurse, so she's an intelligent human being. And I asked her, she lives in Michigan, who, she's very familiar with winter weather and severe weather for that matter. And I said, Mackenzie, do you know the difference between sleet, freezing rain, and hail? And, she is the sister of a meteorologist, and I even thought that she would know, and she didn't, and it's no fault of her own, but, hail and sleet in their, state that we see them can be identical. So it can be initially frustrating, but I totally understand why hail, sleet can be confused. Not to mention throw in freezing rain, and you've got a problem.
Yeah, I think I think the winter precip types just confuse people. Period. When we say there's a chance of ice, well, what is the ice? Is that freezing rain ice or is that sleet ice you're talking about? And when you guys talk about it, Grant, how do you? I know how we group it together. We usually, if we say ice, we try to differentiate the two so that people understand. But how do you guys say ice and group the two together, or?
I think we really, when we specifically talk about sleet, I think we lean towards more saying ice pellets. Ice pellets are possible. And then with freezing rain, we usually take an extra moment to say, look, this is going to fall as rain, but then freeze on contact. I think that if you just say, hey, sleet's possible and leave it at that, you're really not communicating that message well. If you say pellets, then, that kind of helps out.
Funny you should mention that, because there was a email we got probably about a week ago, and they're like, why is the word pellets now coming into a lot of the weather vocabulary when people talk about sleet? Why is it not just sleet? And that was actually the answer we gave. It's kind of by pellet, you kind of get this visual of what it is, and it helps people understand the difference between the sleet that bounces and the freezing rain that kind of clings to everything. So.
And it's also we'll usually in like web stories, we'll also use the descriptor of, sleet is what makes the noise. Sleet is what tings or dings, and that's what you're going to hear on your roof at night or on your car is going to make that noise. So if you're driving along and it's raining, and then all of a sudden you start hearing more about ping, 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 that's sleet. Freezing rain's not going to make a noise, and snow isn't going to make a noise either.
I got one more viewer question, and we've talked a lot about frozen precip, but this viewer who one of our younger viewers wants to know, why is it sometimes raindrops are much larger than other raindrops?
Well, same reason that snowflakes sometimes are bigger than other snowflakes. Snowflakes they tend to combine together, and you're going to have one large snowflake, which if you were to catch and keep it from melting or breaking, you would see it's multiple snowflakes all hanging out together. Same thing with the rain. It's a bunch of different properties in the atmosphere, but essentially you have more raindrops that are able to come together, or more water droplets, and form a larger raindrop.
Scotty,
that was a very good question. That was good. I like that. I have a couple of more of your questions. We're actually getting a lot of your questions And I know we're coming up on the 9 o'clock hour. This one, it makes sense to me, and I know it'll make sense to you guys as well. A lot of people are wanting to know how can it snow, sleet when it's above 32 degrees.
Well, it all goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that it's not just what is happening at the surface, but it's what's happening above our head. So if you get a snowflake that falls from a cloud, and there's a deep enough layer of cold air to keep that snowflake together all the way down to the ground, because that's the ultimate goal, is to keep the snowflake intact. And as long as you've got enough cold air to do that, you know, we've had snows around here even when the temperatures have been close to 40 degrees, even the low 40s. So, you know, not big, usually it's not big snows, but we've had snowflakes that have fallen. So, you know, it's all about what's happening above our head. And I like to kind of compare it when we go to schools, talk about it. That the atmosphere above our head is kind of like a layered birthday cake, where you've got some layers are warmer, some layers are colder, some are wetter, some are drier. So, you know, that as a meteorologist, that's what we need to figure out before a snow event is, you know, what types of layers are going on up there, and how warm are they? Are they going to melt the snowflake, or is it going to fall as just rain?
So it's like with Joey when he gets his Dippin' Dots, and the Dippin' Dots are in the freezer, and then when he takes it back to his seat at the basketball game, those Dippin' Dots don't melt right away because they were really cold when they were in the freezer. So, you know, if it was cold enough, then he's going to have time to eat his Dippin' Dots before they melt.
You have a viewer behind you, Grant.
I know.
All right. Well,
You were back there.
well, that's all the precip questions that we've got from viewers, and I think we've covered all of our precip types. Do you guys have anything to add to that before we kind of close out the show?
Hey, we didn't talk about hail a whole lot. I think hail is, to me, one of the really fascinating ones, just because, you know, with hail, it kind of tells a story. So with hailstones, they form up in a thunderstorm where it's very, very cold, and then they fall down a little bit, and they're pushed back up inside the storm from the updrafts, and they get another layer of cold, another layer of ice around them. So what's cool is that if you get a hailstone that's big enough, and it falls to the ground, kind of like tree rings on a tree tell the story, tell the age of how old that tree is. Same thing happens with a hailstone. If you get a big enough one, you can cut it open and see how many rings are on that hailstone, and it kind of tells how many times it's been up inside of a cloud. So hailstones to me are kind of fascinating. I think those are extremely fascinating.
They are, and we get a lot of question about those at school visits.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Brent. I mean, if you get a large hailstone, I mean, clearly, if you have a large enough hailstone the size of like a golf ball or larger, I mean, you want to get that thing and take it inside. And if you have enough of them, yeah, you know, take like a serrated knife and try to cut that thing in half. I mean, it's just like I compare it to like a tree. You know, if you were to, you know, take a look at the trunk of a tree, if you were to cut it, you see all the rings for every year that it's, you know, for it is old. And same thing, you know, with the hailstone, you can tell how many times it's made that trip up into that cloud, and it's really a cool thing. You're literally looking at the life cycle of a hailstone.
Yeah.
Largest hailstone any of you have actually seen in person?
I saw one time a golf ball. That's probably the biggest.
Yeah, about a golf ball. I mean, that's about the biggest thing, and that was in Georgia. I don't even think I've seen that here in North Carolina.
Yeah.
I saw baseballs in North Carolina.
Oof.
Yeah, it was a Mother's Day storm. Did $5,000 damage to my car. No lie, I was sitting in the driver's seat, looking at the side view mirror. Hailstone took the whole side mirror off. Not the glass, the entire mirror.
We had, the one I can remember, the one we had up here was it was a hail storm that went through, and literally it looked like a machine gun had hit the vinyl siding of a house that was out near Smith Mountain Lake. I mean, if you were to look at it, that's what you would have thought had happened. It was just looked like a war zone, but it was hailstones. It was impressive.
I'd say the worst hail I've ever seen was probably between maybe golf ball and tennis ball. And the funny thing about it, it was like in the month of June, and it rolled through McDowell County at 6:30 in the morning. So that was very odd to say the least. And when you start getting up that size toward tennis ball, it's amazing. You'll have damage everywhere. I remember the area that I saw that had the largest hail. They were like leaves everywhere because you're at that time of year where the trees are fully, grown out and stuff. And it was just, it was weird that number one I saw hail that big, but I saw hail at that time of the morning.
Right.
I was trying to think back. I think it was the Moore, Oklahoma tornado, or at least around there. I mean, those guys were rocked so hard a couple years ago. But they had some hail damage out there that was just unbelievable. Like you were saying, Brent, the vinyl siding on some of these homes just, obliterated from hail that was being blown sideways up against these homes, and that's some scary stuff there.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely can do a lot of damage. Well, guys, thanks for
home insulation. That's another type of precip that I've not got to see. Speaking of more tornadoes, but
well, guys, I would feel bad if we at least didn't mention it. We're coming into it. It's been a very benign winter so far. We've had a couple of decent cold spells, but they've not really hung on to the area. But as we move into this weekend and then next week, it seems like winter's coming back with a vengeance. And I'd love for both of you guys for the next couple of minutes. I know you guys got TV stuff to do here in just a little bit, but maybe comment on what you see coming up here in the next week or so, and kind of have a little open discussion about that before we close out the show. Brent, you're going to see the Arctic Air first, so I'll
okay. All right. Yeah, I mean, we're still waiting on our first inch of snow in Roanoke. Typically, by this time of year, we've gotten at least 5 to 9 inches. An average year brings us about 18 inches of snow, and that's for Roanoke. Other places around us get a little bit more, but we've at the TV station have only measured 7/10 of an inch, so we haven't even gotten our first official inch yet. We've had several sleet events, some mixed with snow, maybe just a coating here or there over the course of the winter, but that's it. So we're waiting, just looking at the models. I mean, our coldest days that we're going to get here look like it's going to be on Friday, and then again on Sunday is the brutal cold. The highs here are only going to get into the 20s, but you got to look too at the other part of a snowstorm, and that's moisture. And there's no moisture that's really coming in for us with this cold snap at the beginning. And I know that some of the models have indicated Tuesday we may have a little bit of moisture coming in from the south, but also a lot of the models now saying that some of the heart of the cold air is now going to start to move to the north. So what does that mean for us? Does it catch up in time so that we get at least a little bit of snow around here? More than likely, like if we were to take a stab at it right now, it looks like it may start as a little wintry mix and then go over to even just some rain. But again, it's way too early to tell. But they still, even at this time, it's like they can't seem to the cold air and the moisture to meet up around here at least.
Yeah, Brett, we're in the same exact situation as you guys are. I mean, Tim Buckley, our other meteorologist here, he put together a graphic yesterday, and something that we probably should have started earlier, but basically a daily running total of how long it's been since our last 1 inch plus snowfall, and we're going on 341 days here in the Triad since we've seen 1 inch or more. So I mean, we haven't seen a 1 inch snowfall. We had a trace, and I mean, I think that was even being generous. I would call it a snowflake earlier on. So I mean, yeah, we're watching this Arctic blast too. Originally, we thought there may be a little bit of moisture to come in Saturday night with that second Arctic cold front, but I mean, yeah, the chances of that are pretty slim. I think the mountains might get a little bit of a flurry or two, but I mean, yeah, we're watching that system on Tuesday as well, and it's one of those things where I mean, you're juggling so many things. Is the cold air going to be in place? Yeah, the moisture's there, but where's the track of the low pressure system? Does it track farther to the west and it brings us more warmth, or if it goes more over us, then we have a better chance of seeing that winter precip. Regardless, it's not an ideal setup for accumulating snow. I mean, we may get some snow on the front end. It could transition over to a sleet and maybe a brief period of freezing rain, and then all rain. And at that point, any accumulation, if you see anything, is pretty much done for. So, I mean, we're actually looking at warming temperatures overnight Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. So you're going to have your best chance of winter precip Tuesday morning, which, yeah, could cause some problems for travel. So that's kind of the main thing we're looking at right now.
Yeah, it just doesn't look like a big, a big event. And the other thing is that we might could bring up. It seems like the models this winter have just had a tough time, pinpointing some of these storms. I mean, they'll hint at them, a long way in advance, and then when you get a little closer to them, the actual event just kind of goes away. So have you guys noticed the same thing?
There's a slight.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. It's like you get one model that wants to, go bonkers on a storm system, and then it hangs on to it for a couple of days, and you think, oh, well, the Euro will say, it seems like it has something on this system that the GFS doesn't. And then it's almost like sometimes they'll flip, and then the GFS picks up on it, and the Euro, kicks to the side, and you're sitting there going, what? And then you're starting to question yourself. You're trying to remember, wait, was it the Euro that had that? I don't remember. So yeah, but the thing that's interesting about this one on Tuesday, at least, is both of them had it. And so then it was like, oh, maybe we may have something here, but you're right, Brett. I mean, the models have been atrocious this year, which is unfortunate because last year, especially the Euro, was on point with winter storms. So how does that happen? I don't know.
I was going to ask your take on why the models have been so wishy-washy this year. I mean, like you said, the Euro was on point last year, but this year, neither one of them's really done a great job.
For the generic, and then I have to relamp 2 other to Proud. So
I mean,
Daniel, go ahead.
I mean, just a brief answer to that is, I mean, when you have a jet stream that is just so loopy, when it's not taut and pulled tight, when you have, when it's doing one of these things where you have a lot of loose ridges and troughs, there's so many little disturbances that can ride, in and out of those troughs and ridges that the models are just not going to pick up on. So, that comes into play where you just have so many minor, errors that, grow out in time. So if you have a small error in your 2-day forecast period, that's going to be exacerbated into your 7 and 8 day period, and that's when these models pick up on these huge storms, and that does make it complicated.
The old fantasy 7-day storm. Daniel, I know you've done a lot of research. Looking at.
That's my phone, folks. I can talk to them later.
Daniel, I know you've done a lot of research. Long term, what is your thoughts on the upcoming cold front and the possibly active storm track next week?
Well, just looking at what I've been looking at the last few days, of course, I think the models have done a good job going back to late last weekend of depicting the cold air that's coming down. One thing I've noticed, and we didn't have this in January, it seemed like every time, and Grant talked about how the models at 5 to 7 days out was showing it, and then it would change. The western North American ridge that was forming would always flatten out as we got closer to, say, verification of an event we were looking at. I think that's one little bit of a difference maybe with what's coming up here in the next week or so. That ridge finally is looking a little bit more persistent. It may not be exactly in the right position to give us a big winter weather event, but I think it's going to be in a position to allow the cold air to be able to stay a little bit longer and to allow a storm track that would be a little bit more favorable. I don't think it's the perfect scenario by any means, but it looks a little bit better. And one thing I want to mention, and I know Scotty, I've talked to Joey about this winter has been really weird if you think about it. Go all the way back to November when we had the super typhoon Nuri, I think that's the name of it, in the Pacific. That storm went up into the Bering Strait, and I think it broke records for like surface pressure of a non-tropical event or something. And then what happened, and I think a lot of people correlated to it, is we had that really cold November. But I've always, well, not always, but here in the last few weeks, I've wondered, did that event actually mess things up more than it really helped? In the short term, right when it happened, we had that cold air, but I think that there's a potential that it might have messed things up in the long term. Because if you go and look back, and this will be something good to look at when the winter's over, shortly after that storm did its thing and it bombed out, it seemed like that same area between Alaska and eastern Siberia started developing higher heights. And I'm thinking about it compared to last year, you had a lot of western North American region But with Nuri and the way all that kind of formed this year, it almost like shifted it west some, and it really kind of reoriented things a little bit. Like Grant said, you're having little areas, small areas that try to block or try to hold steady, and then what you end up happening is just a whole bunch of variation. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, man. I mean, that's one of those things that you definitely got to wait until the end to see, if it truly. I mean, I think at this point you got to look at everything. I mean, this has just been a weird winter. I mean, with the models not being able to pick up on some of this, and the jet streams being so active and wild, and I don't know. Stuff like that does fascinate me, and I'm sure there's probably somebody now that's researching it and looking into it.
Yeah, I mean, that's stuff that you really do. I mean, I'll be honest, on the day-to-day, I don't get a chance to look at all that kind of stuff, it's crazy because that stuff does, in a way, drive our long-range forecasting. What happens over in China, today could theoretically, play a part in, our amplification of a trough or a ridge, 7-8 days from now. So, it's tough, but I mean, it just goes to show that there's so many variables that come into play that have to be considered for forecasting.
Well, the thing I really noticed after we had the cold air in November is that you tended to have a little bit more blocking over eastern Siberia and the Bering Strait. Then you had generally some more troughiness over Alaska and the northern part of the Pacific. And I think what that also created is that allowed a little bit more of a faster Pacific flow that went into the western U.S. Because if you noticed in December and January, they started getting a lot more rain out there. And usually, for our part of the country, when you have a fast flow from the Pacific, it just floods you with at least moderating air, and it just doesn't allow the big troughs to develop and allow your big storms to develop.
Yeah, me and Daniel spent some time actually trying to go back to past winters that were similar to what we've had so far this winter and look for tropical development in the Pacific that actually pushed a storm into. We have no lives, but anyway, we're getting a little past 9, so I know we got to wrap up. Does anybody want to actually touch past 7 days and go for that Thursday-ish storm next week, Friday? Anybody want to even remotely? No.
Well, I mean, I will say that I won't specifically mention them, but you open up that door, to the Arctic, and you enter kind of an active pattern. And if you have an active pattern in winter, when you have the cold air, you open up the possibility more for winter weather. So, an active pattern, yeah, probably a better chance of seeing something compared to what we haven't seen so far.
I think we should go on Facebook and see, because I'm sure someone else has already predicted a foot of snow already for next Thursday.
Hang on a second while I post a Euro.
Yeah, I mean, I think this far out, heck, even Tuesday is a stretch trying to pinpoint what's going to happen there. I don't think we've had any storm really this year. We haven't had any storm period, but I don't think there's been any storm period this winter that's been like a dead right on. This is exactly what's going to happen. The one last year, the February one seemed to be a really good one where the models picked it up, 10 days out, followed it through, and it was just kind of little tweaking here or there. But I don't think we've had any of those this winter that around here that we could even come close to being able to predict that far out.
Yeah, it's just too much inconsistency all year to even attempt it at this point. But I agree with you guys. I think we're going to get into an active period, and this is our shot. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen in the next week, 10 days. So that's where I'll go.
It better happen, right, Graham? Because we're tired of hearing all these people want snow.
I do have to say, just because I think this is incredibly funny, Tim Buckley, our other meteorologist, the weekend evening guy, he got so tired of having people, ask questions. I mean, and Brett, I'm sure it's the same thing, and I'm sure, Scotty and Joey and all you guys, it's the same thing. You could post something about what you had for lunch. You post a picture of your cheeseburger, and someone would comment and say, "When's it gonna snow?"
Oh yeah.
And and so to that, Tim just got so fed up with it that what he started doing is anytime that he posted something and there was a question that was out of context about how much snow or when are we going to get snow, he would reply to those comments with a picture of a cat, just to, reply back with the same amount of randomness.
Yeah.
And so if you ever see a picture of a cat on his Facebook page, that's what's going on there. It's really funny.
Love it. I love it. Hey, and Grant, I don't know about you guys down there, but February for people that may not know is a TV ratings month. So a lot of times we plan. You usually have at least one snowstorm that you can talk about in the month of February. So we've had to be really creative here in our neck of the woods and coming up with some interesting weather stories aside from talking about, nobody wants to hear about cold and wind. They want to hear about the snow. So people hate you when you talk about cold and wind, but if you mention snow, then they get excited. So we've had to be creative around here lately.
Just post a Euro.
Yeah.
Good old ratings February. One thing you touched on before we kind of close up, I don't really think a lot of people are thinking about this right now, but wind chill values are going to be pretty intense this weekend. You guys want to talk a little bit about that? I mean, I've seen some locations up in our mountains of North Carolina where it's going to be 10 below zero wind chill value. So it seems like wind chills are going to be a concern Sunday morning at least.
Yeah, I mean, we've got weather services that mentioned they may issue the wind chill advisories and all that for over the weekend. But yeah, we could have our lows at night are going to be in the single digits, like between 5 and maybe 9 degrees, and that might be pushing it in some cases. And then the winds for us are going to be in that 20 to 30 miles per hour with some higher gusts. So the wind chill values are expected to be well below zero, and a lot of people don't realize the whole wind chill thing. They see the numbers, but they don't exactly understand what it is. But wind chill is basically the feels like temperature, or what it feels like to your exposed skin when you combine the air temperature and the amount of wind. So the wind chill, on TV a lot of times, we've got some live data that we can pull up, but a lot of times they'll see a fixed number on a graphic and see that that's the wind chill. But the wind chill changes all the time based on the current wind speed. So it's always going to be fluctuating. So we always talk about, do pipes feel wind chill? No, they don't. But people do. So it's always a confusing topic too.
Yeah, in wind chill, I would take a 5 below, or maybe not extreme, but I would take an actual temperature of extreme cold over a wind chill of that equal value any day, just because at least if you have a temperature of, say, 5 degrees, your body naturally creates a little bubble of warmth around you. So the actual temperature may be 5 degrees outside, but your body is able to regulate that at least for a short period of time. But when you have the wind blowing on that exposed skin, your body isn't able to create that bubble of warmth. The wind literally blows that away, and you've just got that raw, cold on your skin, and that's where it really becomes an issue with those extreme wind chills. I mean, actually, we're forecasting, wind chill values probably down around 5 to 8 below, and that's just nothing that you want to mess with. I mean, the people up in Minnesota, they were making fun of me the last time that we had, extreme cold back in January, because they had wind chill values down at 40 below, but you just don't want to mess with it. It's dangerous. You can get hypothermia. You can get frostbite with those kind of temperatures. And I'm thinking about church Sunday morning, or kids out at the bus stop. Even on Friday morning, it's going to be pretty cold.
Well, and I just looking at the latest data. Monday morning is looking very cold too. So kids are probably going back to school Monday morning. It's not going to be good out there.
Yeah.
No. And it's actually I was thinking about this, like, we had 72 degrees for a high on Sunday, and then now we're talking about feels like temperatures, down around 8 below Sunday morning. That's an 80-degree temperature swing for what you're feeling here in the Tri. So you go just over 7 days, and it's going to feel 80 degrees colder here in Greensboro.
That's crazy to think. Well, guys, we'll kind of wrap it up there. I'll let you guys, as always, plug your social media outlets so we can get a hold of you and tweet random cat pictures to each of you. Brent, I'll let you go first.
Okay. I'm mine's pretty simple. It's Watts Up Brent, and that's on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. So WATTS BUPBRENT. Watts Up Brent.
Awesome.
And
Grant?
my Twitter and Instagram is Grant_Gilmore. I'm still trying to figure out how to make Instagram relevant for weather, but I've had some people actually work in it where they'll post their own picture and tag me in it, so that's pretty cool to see that. But then for Facebook, it's just facebook.com/Grant Gilmore. So I mean, you Google or not Google it, but put in the search and you'll be able to find it. But there's always that conversation of, what's best for weather, and I still get back to, I think Twitter's the best, platform for sharing weather information. So that's where I spend most of my time and energy. But if you want long, full discussions, go directly to the Facebook page, because if you're just waiting for it to show up in your news feed, you'll probably get last week's picture of the snow that we were forecasting.
Hey, Grant, could you call our viewers here in the Western Carolinas and tell them about Twitter, because most of them have not seen it yet.
It's still taken a while for us here in Greensboro. I mean, it's weird how some places just have a great interaction on Twitter, but other places just it's crickets out there.
I'm telling you, we expanded into our 5th county this past week, and we put a message out saying, we're wanting to get more active on Twitter. I mean, we literally got really negative remarks on it. One person said they didn't have time for Twitter, and I'm like, well, you have time for Facebook, so why not Twitter? But anyways, but yeah, that's great. And also, Grant, you guys do an awesome thing at WFNY with your spotter group. Maybe you want to plug that right quick for those who are in the Triad area.
Yeah, so we about 6 months ago we started up a Facebook group, a Facebook group called the WFMY News 2 Weather Network, where I think we're close to about 600 members now, where we've opened it up to anybody who is interested in kind of the behind-the-scenes forecasting, and we try to open up for dialogue, not just between our meteorologists, but for other weather geeks in the community to talk about how high to set up their anemometer on the side of their house and stuff like that, but just to talk about forecasting and that sort of thing. So that's really been successful. It's just an easy search on Facebook. Again, WFMY News 2 Weather Network, and you have to request to be a member. But we pretty much just click and say okay for anybody who wants to be a part of it. And from there, what we do is we actually get people who have weather stations, so thermometers, rain gauges, if you have that, or even if you have barometers and all of that. We're trying to collect more spotters. That we have our own kind of exclusive spotter network where our spotters are able to log into a website and log their weather data and communicate with other spotters in the area, and they basically choose their own icons, they submit their own data, and that information automatically feeds into our graphics, and then so we can go on the newscast and say, hey, look, Steve Monday out in Atwell, he's reporting a high temperature of 52 today. So that's been really successful, and it's really cool because you get some of these communities that don't have official weather stations, and we're getting their data out there, so it's neat.
It really is. It's a nice setup. I wish I was in your viewing area so I could add my graphics, but it is. You guys do a great job, and I do have to commend you guys. You and Tim both are very active on there and not afraid to interact with all the followers in the page, so it's a really cool idea.
Yeah, it's working well. It's just it's one of those things where more information is better.
That's exactly right. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming on, Brent. I hope we didn't scare you away. I know I wasn't meaning for those questions to get that scientific.
No, I think it's great. I appreciate you thinking of us here in Southwest Virginia. And I guess one last question for Grant. This is a question for Grant. Where does the Piedmont start and where does it end for you guys? Because that's always like this mystery place. The Piedmont.
I mean, for us, I consider basically, in terms of counties, I don't know how familiar you are with our counties down here, but like Winston-Salem, say, I think once you get north and west of Winston-Salem, that's pretty much when we start our Piedmont talk. So 52, Highway 52, basically as it runs north, because when we look at like Pilot Mountain and King and Mount Airy, up in Surrey County, that's those are the foothills for us. So basically, once you get west of Winston, that's our foothills.
Very good, very good.
What about you guys?
Well, we kind of have what we call the South Side in the Piedmont. That would be kind of Danville, Caswell County, the places like that where basically it's kind of towards that area. So I mean, that's always the big thing when you kind of clump the areas together to try to give a forecast for them. It sometimes can get confusing, but no, I mean, I think those are very similar areas. So I think we're good.
Yeah. I get that question a lot. Someone's like, "What is a Piedmont?"
Yeah.
I'm in the wonderful Catawba County where half of us think it's the foothills and half of us think it's the Piedmont, and most of us don't care.
Which is probably a good approach.
Well, guys, thank you so much for coming on. And Brent, we'd love to have you back on a program. So we hope that you will come back and join us. And Grant, as always, thank you for giving up your Wednesday night and hanging out with us weather geeks. We always appreciate it.
It's always fun, guys.
Thank you, guys.
All right, guys. So that's. I hope you learned something tonight. And with precipitation types, I'm going to kind of give you a rundown for the next couple of weeks. Next week we have all things weather with Ari. And I can still not pronounce his last name, from the Weather Channel. And then on February 25th, we have Dr. Laura Myers, Tim Belitzi, and Jennifer Watson talking about all things social media. Grant Gilmore was talking just a little bit about that with Twitter and Facebook. So
from a remote location, by the way.
Yeah, Joey and I both will be out in Oklahoma City at the National Tornado and Severe Weather Conference. So we'll both be in Oklahoma City that night, but we'll still be here to give you the show. And then March the 4th, we have all things weather with Mike Bettis, who is actually a new daddy. So Mike's going to be joining us on March the 4th to kind of reminisce about storm chasing and his days at WLOS in Asheville, North Carolina. And then the next week, March the 11th, I'm going to let Daniel plug that, as that has been our next big show that we're going to be having.
Yes, sir. 1 month from now, March the 11th, we're going to have a look back at the 22nd anniversary of the big March '93 superstorm. Anybody that was in really the eastern part of the U.S. back then know that was just about the granddaddy of all storms, at least in modern times. And we're going to have Gary Stevenson from News 14 Carolina, who also had a connection to the Asheville area, working at WLOS at the time. We're going to have Rob Fowler from Charleston, South Carolina, and we're going to have the gentleman from Birmingham, and I forgot his name again. My apologies.
Brian Peters.
Brian Peters.
Brian Peters. I will remember his name by March 11th. I guarantee you that. So that is a big event that we're really looking forward to. We're working hard on promoting that. We'll be putting some new information out on the Carolina Weather Group page here pretty soon about that, and that's a month from now. I'm really looking forward to that. A lot of memories, because for me, I'm 35 years old, and to me, that's still the big storm of my lifetime. And I think for a lot of people, it would be the storm of their lifetime as well.
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to contribute much to that. I was like 4 or 5. So looking forward to those stories.
Hey, I wasn't alive.
That's right. March the 18th, we have Cheryl Nelson. She's a freelance meteorologist, been doing some stuff with storm pins, actually. She's going to be on the show talking how we prepare for natural disasters. Then as we go into April, our next confirmed date, April the 15th, for you sports fans, we actually have Stuart Williams from the PGA Tour, and also Brian Neendorf. I can't pronounce his last name correctly. Newdorf. He is the NASCAR meteorologist, so we're going to have both those guys on. The PGA Tour's in Hilton Head Island that week, and NASCAR's in Bristol, Tennessee. So we're going to have those guys on talking about how they help those sporting outlets prepare for the weather. So, guys, thanks for coming on again tonight. Thank you for watching. Joey, do you have a rant tonight? I know we're running really.
We are way over. We'll just we'll save it for another time. Just my rant this week, real quick and simple. We need more ideas for show topics. So I want you guys to email us and shoot us some messages and give us some ideas for upcoming show topics. That goes for you meteorologists there in the newsroom too. You guys can call us up and say, hey, we want to talk about this, and we'll book it on the show.
Cool.
Sounds good.
Yes, we'd love to have you guys in. Daniel, we may have to do a story about our storm gauges that we're putting up in your county next month.
Yes, and I'll quickly talk about that. The crowd hydrology, I believe that's the name of it. It's a program that's being put together, and it's a pilot program, and McDowell County is the guinea pig and all this. But I'll tell you what, we really appreciate the folks at the National Weather Service and at NOAA for helping getting us on board with that. It's going to really help with helping with rainfall data and stream gauge data. It's going to be pretty similar to the current MPing program where it's crowdsourcing and you got people who can go up and can record that data and can send it in electronically, and it's going to be great. We're really looking forward to that, and maybe later this spring we can talk a little bit more about it here on the Carolina Weather Group.
Wow, McDowell County is going to get something before everybody else. Isn't that a first?
Hey,
all right, Scotty, shut the show down.
Hey, we might not be the first, but we're going to be the best.
Yeah, we're appreciative of McDowell County Emergency Management for allowing us to do that, as well as the National Weather Service. If Grant should bring a team down, and this is actually the first one in the Southeast. There's one in Buffalo, New York, actually up in Michigan, and then out in Salt Lake City. So we're like the fourth area to be introduced in this. So we're looking forward to it.
That's cool. I mean, yeah, you definitely, shoot me an email about it, and maybe we'll send out a photographer or something.
Definitely, we'll do that.
And one last thing, even though we're probably down to like 2 people that are still watching at this point, we are still a little bit short of our goal for going to Oklahoma, right, Scotty? We just need a little bit more.
I think it's like $100, so we're good to go. I have faith that we're going to make it. So, anyway, guys, thanks so much for you caught me off guard there. Thanks so much for you guys coming on tonight, and thanks everyone for watching and listening on the podcast. And we'll see you next Wednesday. Have a great week and stay warm.
Bye, folks.